this podcast will live on Pixelsmith Studios, where it's basically a hub for animators, illustrators, creatives who work in a mix of agency life. And I remember us talking about this earlier, where when you asked me who would be speaking to mostly, and I remember saying that it was people who have studied animation or visual effects towards working for a big studio like Sunrise Productions here in Cape Town or Weta Digital. And then along the way, as they've been trying to find work or trying to find something that's at that level, they found they can also work at a smaller scale by working for themselves or working for an agency doing advertising work for brands like Coca-Cola or Isuzu, and it's still a big platform that they work on, and they still have work where they apply the skills of illustrating in the form of storyboards or illustrating in the form of creating brand identities where it leans more towards graphic designers. And then you also have your motion designers, that would be the area I'm in, where you create content for social media, or you create animated video explainer videos that are used in marketing material or internal training material, or even pitch documents for clients, and then also a lot of them being freelancers. So with that also, we're not going to talk about the skills in design that make design or illustration, for example.
Yeah, sure. We don't have to go into the details of that here.
Yeah, but we will be pulling from those fundamentals as we go along. And then further than that, we'll also be touching around the areas that are important to ask before you even start by sitting down in front of your computer and creating a piece of creative. The areas you can look at while creating the artwork, and then also once you've delivered the artwork, areas that help ensure you are a returning designer, or that clients return to you like professionals. Like we discussed as well, if you say you're going to deliver at 5 p.m., make sure you deliver at 5 minutes to 5 p.m. So from that, let's open the discussion with the very question about what it's around. What would you say are the areas that make a design good? Is it the visual message being delivered effectively? Is it that you can read it clearly and effectively from first glance? Is your target audience being spoken to in a way that they're familiar with? What can you say to that line of question for a start?
Yeah, look, I mean, it could be any number of those things. I mean, it again comes down to the brief. Okay, so if you look at the word design, because this is something that comes up a lot when people start having an endless conversation about design versus art. Design, first and foremost, is a solution to a problem.
Yes,
that's the difference really between art and design. So as soon as you get into a commercial art world, whether it's illustration or modeling or architecture or whatever it might be, you're essentially addressing a business problem that has an end. And that end is defined by the brief. Whereas obviously in an art world, you define the brief and it's generally self-expression. So it all really comes down to the brief. And it's about, on the one side, on the client side, being able to write a proper brief, and from the creative side, or the talent, challenging it or asking enough questions until you properly understand it, because the success of the work that's delivered is simply going to be measured against the brief. And you'll find a lot of people saying, well, this design's good, this design's bad. It's kind of silly unless you know what the brief was.
Yes.
Because that in itself is already an assumption.
Yes.
I know designs that were actually designed specifically to sync a product. And people go, oh, that's a terrible design. Yeah, but that was the point. It's actually a brilliant design.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So yeah.
No, that makes sense, because if your design is intended to create a shock reaction, or it's designed to get people to think, oh, that was pretty clever, how did they do that? And then you want them to look twice, then that's good. And I fully understand that as well. If you brief, that depends, because what works for one platform, say for example, what works for a Facebook video won't be the same as a video that works very effectively on LinkedIn, because the two people that you're speaking to are completely different. The two demographics on Facebook, you've got someone that's scrolling and they quickly checking up if their aunt has had any new kittens because they might want to adopt. Or you have someone on LinkedIn that's actively job hunting, and especially in these times when you have a profile that has a flourish that says open to work or hiring or stuff like that. So that's there where your content of your brief is important, because you need to know, what am I saying and who am I saying it to, but how am I saying that message?
Yeah, so that's a whole other thing as well, because that comes down to also the level of the level of the creative person, and whether they're starting out or how experienced they are, because generally speaking, you're going to hire someone. Like if I'm hiring a motion graphics guy, and I've got, let's just say there's a client and we need a campaign that's going to have, it's a competition and it's going to have some motion stuff, and I'm going to say it's going to go onto social. Now, from that point on, I could say these are the platforms. I could say recommend the platforms. I could say it needs to go onto Facebook and it needs to do this. There could be but the more that I need to do, the less I'm going to pay the guy, because the more knowledge that I need, right?
Yes.
If you've got a really high-end guy and you just say we're doing a campaign on social media, it's got to achieve this. A really senior person won't need anything else, because he will then start asking business-related questions. And to demonstrate an understanding of the ultimate revenue kind of supply chain, if you like. And then he's just going to deliver work that works. And that's why you've basically chosen this person in the first place, because you've obviously seen previous work that's happened, and that's kind of how it works. And so that's why, like juniors, that's why it's hard to break in, because it just takes time and experience, because the more you've got to, I mean, that's why they go and join agencies, because you've got to learn on the job. There's always an art director or a senior designer that's going to keep bouncing it back, saying, no, no one's going to see that. No, don't use a serif. No, on a phone, I'm not going to read that. No, that's a flipping gig of animation, and it's just going to be rejected, or whatever it might be.
Yes.
And I feel like it's getting more difficult, because there are a lot of kind of SMEs that go out, small guys who've just learned something like last week, and then go and pitch themselves for bigger things and get into a price war and undercut people, and then kind of can't deliver stuff. And then it sets a precedent. And people start saying, well, geez, you paid so much for that. Why did you pay so much? Because the public gets taught about bad design, largely. So there's that whole side of it as well.
Yeah, that's what you explaining now reminds me a lot of a discussion that was closer to the middle to the end of last year. Platforms like Fiverr, who are there to help people find work. It's easy to find someone on Fiverr for a very low price and a low grade of creative. And then when you want someone that really knows their stuff, and it really creates artwork that really meets the needs of the brief, is design, sound, and really is pleasing to look at, their price will be so much higher. But it's also, I've learned and seen that a lot of the guys on the lower end of the price range tend to get the briefs, because people are always looking for where they can get it better. But that then also asks the question, are you really willing to pay for the quality that you're looking for? It comes to the point where a designer that's able to execute a brief at a high senior level will be more expensive. And if you want that, you have to be willing to pay for that. You can't expect to pay $5 for a logo that will withstand the test of time, for lack of better description.
Well, I mean, this is exactly it. And this is why education is so important. And it has to come down to, it just comes down to questions. For me, it's become such an easy thing to do now, because I've just spent so long doing it, that, if a client will say, why would a logo cost? Like if I look at the Orange Telecom logo, it's an orange square with the word orange at the bottom with all lowercase Helvetica. And then you say, well, it costs, 200,000 euros or 2 million euros to develop, and people just go, but that's insane. Why on earth would it cost that much? It would take 5 minutes to design. You could do it in PowerPoint. But the thing becomes, I'll say, yeah, that's fine. It won't be quick. But how do you know that it's got to be an orange square with Helvetica at the bottom?
Yes.
Because that's really what you're paying for. You're paying for the knowledge. I mean, I was out of time once and I tried fiber once and it was a complete waste of time. It was faster for me to just do it myself than to actually spend so much time trying to fix the kind of the rubbish that was given to me. Now, I'm not saying that there's a lot of people on Fiverr, I'm sure, that are good guys and have highly bet, but it's the finding of them, it's the filtering, it makes design a commodity, not an investment.
Yes.
And therefore people start seeing it as decoration. And it's really not about decoration. It's people say, oh, you need a logo. Cool. I'll design up a logo. They don't even know what the function of the logo is unless they've got a deep understanding of the category, the business, the competitors, the future of the business plan, where they want to grow, how they want to grow. It's much more complex than just, let's make something that looks cool today.
Yes.
And that's the problem. The market doesn't see the importance of the investment. And the people that do, they will then go and choose the big agencies, because with a huge multinational, they can't run the risk of choosing a small company that knows what they're doing because they don't know how to evaluate it either. That's the problem. It's one of the hardest things to be able to evaluate an effective return on investment.
Yeah.
You can see that it happens, but it's hard to. And if you look at what that Orange Telecom logo is worth now, it's like 100 times the cost of what it cost to develop. But it's hard to prove that the identity that you're going to develop is going to do that to a client. There's almost like a leap of faith that's got to happen.
Yeah.
And that's got to do with you as an individual convincing them to trust you.
Yeah, I can understand that. Staying on the example of the Orange Telecom logo towards logo design in particular, but also this would link back to a creative project for a campaign. Say, for example, you need to create a campaign logo that will live for a short while, for about 3 to 8 months. What would you then say are some of the most important questions to ask before you start the project?
And we're saying specifically in identity design.
Yes, specifically an identity design for a campaign that's going to be short-lived. You could take it into the space of a actual company branding logo that would create their overall logo that they will live under until they rebrand completely. But just for the sake of this episode,
so to be like a device for a competition that's going to run 6 months. That sort of thing.
That sort of thing. Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, like anything else, it comes down to two fundamentally important things: understanding the brief in terms of what it has to do, and who it has to work for. That's the biggest thing. So again, a lot of the time, the problem is that people, because clients, whoever the client is, whether it's, and you'd be surprised, it happens a lot in agencies as well. They don't allocate enough time because there isn't budget for the time. So they'll say, well, let's just knock it out. It's got to look like this. And we'll just make all kinds of assumptions. It depends on how important it is that works. If it's just something you're going to put out there and whether it works or not doesn't really matter, then sure, spend. I mean, the way I try and explain it to people is I say, if this logo, if someone's life depended on whether this logo worked or not, how much time would you spend on trying to research and analyze the market and be sure that the brief is somehow connecting buying or purchasing behavior of the market to your business strategy? Like, how are you ultimately going to draw a line between what you are doing, what you're going to put out there creatively, and how that actually translates into your bottom line?
Yeah.
And you'll find that if someone's life depended on that, they'd spend most of their time researching the market.
Yes.
Because you can't afford to make mistakes.
You would say,
but because it can't be measured like digital marketing, then they go, well, the data, that you can hide behind all kinds of rubbish. You can say, well, this and the research we did, and that what research? It's rubbish. It's like research takes long. And that's why, again, experience matters, which is why people with experience cost more because, people with 20 years of experience have worked in pretty much every category.
Yes.
So a lot of the stuff already. And even though you may be making assumptions, they're more accurate assumptions. then someone's just guessing. And you also have the confidence to say, I don't know enough, and I'm not taking that on unless I know enough.
It also helps, the experience also helps you to be able to gauge a brief and look at it and decide for yourself as a designer or an animator or even a freelancer that has to juggle 4 or 5 different skills. Is this going to be worth my time and possibly some of my health?
Yeah, especially with especially with the digital guys. I mean, with motion and animation and modeling. I mean, geez, how many you're going to spend sleepless nights in a dark room somewhere, pushing After Effects. You're going to lose your mind and your kidneys at the same time. It's just, is it worth it? Especially when someone comes back and gives you 1,000 revisions that would never have happened if you managed expectations properly right in the beginning with an accurate brief.
Yeah, and then when you get up from your chair, you sound like a snapping glow stick.
Yeah. I mean, it is that thing, actually, now that I think about it. It's really just about expectation management. And that's why people should spend more time at the brief stage.
Yeah.
Because if you get that right and you get the expectation management correct, there's less back and forth. And you end up saving so much time, actually. But people are so desperate to start that because then they think, shit, I've got to meet this deadline. Let me start now. But the irony is that you actually end up taking you just end up taking a lot longer a lot of the time getting it done than if you just slow down and you analyze it properly from the beginning. I live my life by I think it's an Abraham Lincoln quote where he says, if I've got a tree to cut down in 8 hours, I'll spend the first 6 hours sharpening the axe. And for me, that I kind of approach everything like that. Don't solve the wrong problem, basically.
Exactly. Make sure that you get what you need sorted at the start. I had a colleague who I chat to till this day, because we worked together quite a bit when we were at the same agency. He was a UX UI designer, and I was always briefed with doing the tours of his products for the clients, because we found 90% of the time it was just more efficient briefing the tour to me as the animator while he keeps on designing and problem solving. And one of the philosophies he lived by was do 90% of your work in the planning and 10% of your work in the execution.
Exactly. And this is something again that I feel, especially illustrators and illustrators that do stuff like storyboard stuff at agencies and concept artists for games, those kinds of things. If you are hired as an illustrator, you've been hired based on a portfolio. There's an assumption that you've got the skill. Now, if you've got a meeting tomorrow morning and you've got to show, a concept art for a scene, it doesn't help necessarily making it pretty because you're insecure about how because you want them to go, geez, you're an amazing artist. Like that doesn't help anyone the next morning if you've spent all night and you're exhausted and you've got a beautiful scene that you've rendered, as opposed to quick sketches to get the message across, so that when the creative director or the art director says, look, I think we might try this angle better, because in 10 seconds, you've just lost 4 hours of work.
Yeah.
As opposed to, as opposed to the idea of telling a story with very few lines.
Yes.
Because that would then be the function. And you can get to finished art right at the end. And it's an insecurity thing that I find happens with young designers and artists. It's just the confidence to know that, well, I don't need to show my skill in this meeting. I need to show my ability to communicate an idea. And there's a very big difference between the two. And the communicating of the ideas is more important if you're a concept artist, because you're selling a concept.
Yes.
You're not a finished artist. So that speaks to exactly what you were saying. Invest your time in the right places.
Yeah, and that's also.
Yeah, I almost think of it. I almost think of it as if I'm outsourcing everything. Like, I almost think of it as if I'm going to outsource stuff to myself. What is worth, like, if the clock's ticking and I'm paying for my time as an outsider, how would I brief myself on where the best return on investment is of the time?
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, that for me is a great way to think about it.
What you just said now, if you're for working for yourself, you need to decide where's the best return on investment for your time. It also links to the entrepreneurial thinking that is required of creatives, especially because of a lot of them do so much freelancing.
Yeah.
So then I remember we touched on this prior as well. And if you, that makes me have a bit of a candid question for you, but if you could work on any creative project without a budget limit, what would that project be?
Yeah, look, it's such a tough question, that, because creativity needs boundaries. Essentially without restrictions, you can't have creative, because that's the whole point of chrono. It's one of those sort of limitations that one needs. However, having said that, there's always going to be limitations. If budget isn't your limitation, it then becomes like, how much can I give Joe Biden to do this ad? Like,
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, if it's not money, what is your barrier then? Is it physics? Is there a strongest guy in the world that can pick up a helicopter? Well, probably not. So that's just not a budget thing. That's just what it, but it would probably be things like taking a brand and making the brand come alive in a whole lot of different mediums, to the point of, let's just say it's a space, hypothetically an office, and going down to like designing the door handles, designing like the actual bathrooms, like the basins from scratch, like every single detail of where the touch points would be, designed completely from scratch. That would really be an incredible thing. Like elevators or whatever. You literally can design every single step of the journey.
Yes.
Which would just be obviously an insane and stupid waste of money, but damn, it would be fun. It would also take forever. Like, you'd never get to the end of it, but it would be it's just a fun idea thinking about it.
Yeah. I love how you answered it, because your answer lends itself to what we were discussing just now. Also, what would make a design good is if it achieves its goal. So if I were to walk in this space for this brand, and it's been designed to the level that you described now, and the journey that I would experience has been thought through and cultivated and nurtured and researched and has evolved over time, I would walk into a space and go, holy hell, I was in this space and it was so amazing. Like, I walked in and my coffee was ready.
You could take that experience to such a ridiculous degree that you'd never forget it. I mean, you could say to someone, put on these shoes, before you got in, because those shoes are designed because you've got the way that the temperature is managed as you move through the room changes from the kind of tiles that you're using, and tiles may warm up across the room and the shoes may be cooled down over a certain, but like, you could do just crazy stuff.
Yeah, and
to get up to create such a sensory experience of the whole thing,
and
it's just ridiculous. It moves to the point of
Even though as crazy as it might sound,
carry on.
No, it's all right. I still love what you just said, because even though it might sound crazy, it links to, you need to think about the factors that affect your project. Is something possible or is it not? If it is possible, what are the limits?
That's really interesting, actually. That's really interesting, and I like that, because I think a lot of the time, what you've just brought up is a very relevant thing, and I think this is where younger guys have got an edge, I think, because the longer you spend in the industry, it's impossible not to get jaded to a point. Like, there's a point that comes where you just go, you can see it from a mile level. Yeah, these guys, they're not going to have the budget for that, and so let's do this and this. Or, so much of the time, it can be a simple thing, like having something made. Like, it could be a corporate gift, hypothetically, that has to be custom made in China or wherever, or there's some like guy in the desert somewhere that hand makes these things, and we need 1,000 of them. They just have to be made. And then you've got to compromise to a product that exists. Like, those kinds of things are actually really where budget is nice to have, because it makes such a big impact. But it's nice to be able to think as if there isn't, because what happens then is you can say, cool, you'll perhaps arrive at an idea that you would never have got to had budget been the thing right in the beginning. And that might then bring you to, well, can the idea still work without that kind of budget? Whereas you would never have had the idea in the first place had you approached it with the mindset budget always being a constraint. And that invariably just happens in your career because you just get so used to coming up against that all the time. And as a student, you never get that.
Yeah.
As a student, you do amazing work because they're giving you these dream briefs that can push your creativity and push your stuff. And it's kind of nice to try and hold on to that. I think that's why it's so important for teams to have young guys and interns and brave guys that can come up with the ideas and then have the experienced guys sort of rein it in and make it work. There's a lot to that. There really is.
Yeah, it's that. I think that what you just described is one of the reasons why concept artists and comic book artists in particular, the ones I've spoken to, carry a notebook or a little doodle book, because they're constantly keeping their creative thinking fresh by doodling the whole time. And I do this myself as well. I have these exercise sessions where I'll sit and I'll draw whatever. It can be anything from as crazy as an alien planet that is growing out of the core of the Earth because it feeds on magma.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. But the purpose of that exercise is to cultivate creativity. And that's pretty cool.
And when you do that, you end up with guys like Elon Musk.
Yes.
When you do that, you end up with people like Elon Musk. Like I saw an interview or heard, I can't remember, I think it was a YouTube thing where he talks about, people said, well, you're insane to try and go to Mars or you can't do it. And he was just, well, why not? And they go, well, because this and this. And he goes, well, I'm not so sure. So then he learns about, rocket propulsion and he then finds out himself and he goes, yeah, but it is possible if we do it like this. And he just doesn't live in a world of limitations, and he's prepared to just risk stuff and go for it. I mean, it's unfair to expect, anything other than 0.0001% of the population to be like Elon Musk. But the idea is still there that you can be open with, regardless of how silly you think the idea is.
Yes.
There's something in it that's not silly.
Yes. And it's, and quite often,
and that's why it's important to just free write, free draw, and then go back, because if you do those illustrations and writing and drawings and you go back and you look, there might be just one little thing that comes out of it that just blows up to something amazing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. It reminds me of an art director I used to work with. He had a lot of amazing ideas, and one of the ones I liked quite a bit, particularly because I had to build up all the assets from his storyboard from scratch. It was an advert for Isuzu where we were speaking about holidays and long road trips. And how he brought the two together was playing on the analogy of putting your dog on the backseat of the car with the head out the window and then the tongue flapping in the wind. But then to bring the message of the long road trip home, he made me photograph a model of a tongue in different lengths and angles and shapes, which he then outsourced to a photo retoucher to build a ridiculously long PSD. It was about 12 or 15,000 pixels long of this tongue, which I then went to After Effects, and then the advert starts with this tongue tip that's flapping in the wind, and then I had to animate it bending in the wind, and then as you scroll, because it was also done for an interactive ad, which was amazing. Google DoubleClick is a platform. The times I worked with this was great. So then you'll scroll the ad and the instructions come up to say, keep scrolling, keep scrolling, keep scrolling. And then eventually you get to the Isuzu Bucky with the dog head hanging out and this tongue that's just flapping in the wind. I mean, it's such a comical concept, but it drives the point home of a long road trip. And I mean,
it makes me think of something else important that I think a lot of maybe younger guys, especially guys starting out on their own, starting their own businesses, and that's deadlines and smart ways of getting the job done. Because a perfect solution to a job. This is maybe not the best example, but just off the top of my head, you may arrive at the solution by using Figma as opposed to Premiere Pro. Sometimes, Photoshop Animate will do the job as opposed to After Effects.
Yes.
And I think a lot of the time you get this job and people get so excited about getting stuck in the amazing stuff that you can do in the budget, and they're not necessarily thinking about the mechanics and the process and what is the fastest, most efficient way of doing it, given that it has to do this and this and this. And that might be something like, well, you could say to the director, if you want that small little detail, that can't be done like this. That means we have to do the entire thing in Cinema 4D or whatever. And then it's going to require this and this and this. However, if you compromise on that and we can rather do it like this, that's going to save you 20,000 or 50,000 Rand or R1 million or whatever it might be.
Yes.
And is that 5% going to compromise on the ultimate message? Like for me, that is up to the creative being hired to bring to the table. That's the kind of stuff, because you can't expect the art director or the creative director to know the details of the software. That sort of thing to me is really important. And you only really get that with the really high-end guys, because then younger guys are going to say, well, I want the money, so I'm just going to do it this way. But you're going to end up getting much more work if you become a trusted advisor as opposed to just a propeller head doing the work.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of your LinkedIn activity where you would put up designs that are bad with good reasons. Like, for example, where you posted the ones about the designs that resemble penises.
Yeah.
Dick Clark. And I mean,
Yeah.
Didn't they see the resemblances? And then that also comes to the point where, did you think your design through? It's all fair enough talking about the start of the design and the planning of the design and actually going into the design. But when you're working with something like a product design, for example, a user journey on a mobile device or a point of sale system or even a logo, did you test that design and did you give it a proper stress test to make sure it is sound?
Yeah. So okay. Now this moves into a very, very interesting area, which is the balance between form and function. Now, in some disciplines, product design is a good example. There's a much bigger emphasis, even though it often fails, but there's a much bigger emphasis on function than form, which is why there's so many ugly, very mock products in the world, because they just want to try and get something that works and they forget about aesthetics altogether. It's also why there's so many ugly bridges in the world, because they're designed by engineers and the engineer is concerned about getting it functionally done at the cheapest possible cost. Whereas if an amazing architect is brought in, you end up with like the Sydney Bridge, which becomes an icon for an entire city, and just purely from the income from tourism alone, what that kind of thing can do. Never mind uniting people in national pride. Whereas in, let's call it, for lack of, it's really communication design, but let's call it graphic design for the sake of just history. Things like a logo, it's the absolute opposite problem, because people don't see the function, they only see the form. So then if you don't see the function in a logo, you can't call it design, it's decoration. And that's why clients will come and say, well, I don't like red, or I prefer it if you use the circle. And I've said to a client once, I don't give a shit. I'm not interested in what you like and don't like. I'm interested in what's going to make money and what your market's going to respond to. Because opinions, there's no place. It's like someone coming to the engineer and saying, well, I'd like it if the bridge was a bit shorter because we'd save 100,000 Rand. Or don't put those bolts in, rather put them there. Yeah, but your bridge will fall down. So there's a trust component with the engineer, because there's a lawsuit that happens if the guy's wrong. So he trusts the engineer to make sure that, or the architect to make sure the building stays up or the bridge stays up. But there's no firing squad for people that do bad design. And there really should be. This is what there really should be. Like, you should be locked up.
Yeah.
And there's no accountability for it. Just becomes, well, I like this logo, so let's put out this logo, as opposed to is it going to work? And that's the problem with the graphic art world, because people want the clients want their opinion involved, and I keep going back to the medical industry, which is for me always the best example of this. It's why I would never ever present like 3 logo options to a client, because they're not qualified to choose. So why would you put them in that position? It's like a heart surgeon giving you 3 separate hearts, saying, which heart do you want? It's like, why on earth would you put someone in that position? So I don't do that. I include my clients in the process.
Yes.
And we go through it now, and I make them aware of why we're making every single decision we are while we're going through the process. So by the time you get to the end of it, there is no doubt that is the right solution, the correct answer to the brief.
Yes.
The idea of going away and just doing some creative work and then coming back and going, there, which one do you want, is just ridiculous. And it perpetuates this sad sort of teaching that the industry has taught the market of what design isn't.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and it happens in all the creative arts, really, the commercial art. And that's why it's sad that it's called commercial art, because people then go the art route. And they think that what they like matters.
Yeah, no.
Unless it's for them, unless they're the target market, and then it's fine. I mean, and you joke. I had a client once that he had it was a farming client, and he wanted quite a big company, and he wanted a new identity because he wanted to look good in the town. He wanted it like on his cap and on his jacket, like embroidered, and he wanted to just look cool. It had absolutely no business objectives. And that's fine, because that was the brief. And so you could design it like that, but then be honest about it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, don't expect business results if you want red and, you're dealing in a category where red is the worst possible thing you can use.
Yeah, exactly. I had an example like that. I can't remember. It wasn't that long ago. It was either last year or the year before. I had to help someone with a logo design, and they wanted their logo red and yellow. So I was like, okay, so you want to look like McDonald's? And they're in the food. They were dealing with food, and I was like, I wouldn't go make my primary colors red and yellow like that. Rather look at something else. Look at a different direction.
Well, yeah,
colors.
I mean, I would just ask them why. That for me is always the question. Hi, I'd like my logo to be red and yellow. Why?
Yes.
If you can give me a solid business argument as to why it should be red and yellow, awesome. I'm behind you, because it's not about my opinion either. The decisions have got to be backed by sound market, research and decision making. I'm not going to take accountability for what I prefer either. What I prefer is irrelevant.
Yes.
It's got to do with what's right. So if he says, I want red and yellow because it just, when it just feels like that's the right color, that's not a good enough reason. Why does it feel that way? I need data. I need far more. Go and ask 100,000 people of your market, and you tell me, you know what I mean? It's just not a good enough. It's just not a good enough reason.
Yeah.
And generally, when it comes to clients like that, I just don't take them on, because if they're not going to trust me, then there's no good work that can happen.
No, definitely.
You're just going to waste your time. You don't have a portfolio piece. They're going to be more headaches than they're worth. It's just,
I love how you answered that one, because that's I found quite a few juniors starting out, and I went through this myself. You take on nearly any project you can, and you try to please the client because you think you need the money.
You want to make money.
Yeah.
And that just comes with experience, and it's hard to have the confidence to know, and that's why all of us go through that, because there's no other way to get there until you've paid the price the hard way.
Yes. That is a lesson that you do learn the hard way, and you can be given advice by how many people on what not to do.
And you just won't, absolutely, and there's no other way to learn it other than experiencing it, because they want the money.
Yeah,
and then you realize that actually the money's not worth it, because it's just not.
Yeah, no, it's 100% that. So with that, then I think a nice addition to that part for designers, especially juniors and the ones towards mid who are entering the field of working with clients, who will then experience times where they do need to push back on a client's decisions or requests for how many numerous reasons there might be. For a good example, someone starting a social platform, they ask you, okay, cool, but I want a blue logo. So then you can tell them, maybe a blue logo. Okay, why blue? And then he'll go, because Facebook is blue, Twitter is blue. Yeah.
It's got to start with the why. So the biggest thing with all of this is that people do business with people they like. Then. And you have to build rapport and you have to build trust with the client before anything, because otherwise you're going to end up in that situation where it's just a loggerheads and you end up he just wants you to then become a DTP who just kind of does what he's told. If you've built a relationship of trust and you then, he's already open. So you're not even in a sense challenging or kicking back. It's just, it becomes more of a partnership where you kind of, between the two of you, you've defined boundaries. Like, he knows about his business. He knows more about his business and his industry than I do. And I must respect that. And I must ask the right questions to get the right insight. He needs to respect that he's come to me for a reason. And once those boundaries and that respect has been established, then when you start saying, us, why are you thinking that's interesting? I would never have thought blue. It should never come straight away like, well, I don't think blue. Yes. Because you're not even open as to why. It should be, that's really interesting. I would never have expected you're wanting blue. Why? Why would you go there? That's fascinating to me.
Yes.
And then he goes, well, whatever his reason is. And then you counteract. But the way that you do it is very, the nuances are very specific. And it's all got to do with the way that you are inclusive and work with the guy, as opposed to just telling him what to do. Do you know what I mean?
I love that answer, because twice now I would take the angle of pushback or try and tell the client what to do, and then you came forward with a more mature reply of, it's not always about pushing back, it's about building the relationship. So I really love that reply.
I mean, ultimately, what are we doing? Ultimately, good work happens with good client relationships. Yes. And you've got to think about, like, why are you in this business in the first place? Is it to make a difference to people's lives? Is it to actually help people build their businesses? Or is it just, a selfish wank to show people your portfolio? It really does come down to that sort of thing. Like, I deeply care about my clients' businesses. If they've got a marketing budget of whatever it is per year, if I mess that up, it has serious consequences. And I take that really seriously. I care. And that for me is where the benefit, where the meaning sits. I'm not really interested in doing work with a brand like Coke, because if you mess it up, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, they'll just go, oh, well, we've lost $100 million. Doesn't matter. I want to work with people where the trust it really matters. Because then the reward, you both sharing the success and the testimonials you get, the referral work you get. I haven't in 20 years had to go and find work because of the way that I've worked with my clients. I just get referrals, but it's because I care. It's because I care. I'm not after awards. I can't stand awards. I'm not after trying to impress people. I'm after proving that good design works. That's actually all I really care about.
Yeah,
proving that good design works. And it's an endless thing, because there will always be people who just don't believe it.
That is a good point, actually. That's design it reminds me of a discussion I had with someone about when it comes to design thinking and design maturity within organizations, and how do you approach scaling a team or an organization, or how do you approach scaling a product without design? It's just not going to happen.
Well, that's why design thinking has grown so much, because I think business owners are realizing that, especially the year that we had last year, the idea that innovation is built upon innovation. And so you end up with this exponential graph of being copied sooner and not being able to keep up and crushing competition. Everyone is then being forced to innovate. And the only way to innovate is with design thinking. There's just no other way. So people are starting to respect the concept of design thinking, but they still don't understand things like just basic aesthetics. And people can argue about it as much as, they'll say like beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And yeah, but aesthetics isn't.
That's true.
Whether we like it or not, girls on the cover of Cosmopolitan magazine all look the same. They're all photoshopped. They're all in this photograph, the same angle. Whether it's responsible or whether it's kind of fair or another, all that shit goes out the window. No one cares, because that sells magazines. And So people go, well, if you want to sell magazines or if you want to sell anything really, there are aesthetic rules that you need to play by. And those rules have been set up for 15,000 years with evolution. It's got to do with symmetry. It's got to do all kinds of things. But those things are fundamental to us, whether we accept them or not. It's like the hot girl in the bar always gets hit on more. That's just what it is. And I just don't understand why people don't understand that it doesn't change in business, because it doesn't. And that's why the most successful companies all have hot design.
Yes.
Apple is the first trillion-dollar company, and it's such a polarizing company. Whether people hate Apple or love Apple, they built their brand on design, regardless of whether people like the design or not. The people that do like the design, they're disciples. They're prepared to flip and almost die for it.
Yes.
And it's it's very much how luxury brands work as well. How do you justify the cost of a 50,000 Rand pen? Like you'll have a Mont Blanc pen that can go, whatever, 50, 100,000 Rand for a pen. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to sell a Bic for 9 Rand. They both do exactly the same. In many cases, a Bic will do a better job. And if it falls off a table, it won't break. But how do you justify? There's all these things that people are just skeptical of. And that's why there's so much rubbish design out there, because they just don't see the aesthetic value, even though it's all around us.
Yes, I would link that to, if you were to take Apple's design, which is really great. I'll give Apple that. I myself am not an Apple fan, but I do appreciate
there's no ways that Apple can compete with PC in terms of gaming. It's just not that. It's not that market at all. I mean,
but they do have good design, and they do think their processes through, and they do put a lot of emphasis on the end product being sound, concrete, and it is just great, for lack of better description. But a really good.
Well, it also comes down to that value thing. Then people say, well, it's so overpriced. Yeah, maybe, but people are still buying it.
Yes. There's a good example of why their design has kept them in the lead for all these years. A lot of graphic designers swear by Apple. By MacBooks, by iMacs, or video editors even swear by the Mac Pros, the towers. It was the first one I heard of was the G5.
Back 20 years ago now. Yeah, I mean, and the thing is though that you can say to, like, I'm an Apple guy. I've been working with Apple for over 20 years, and you could say to an Apple guy, it doesn't make sense. The PC tech is infinitely cheaper. It's faster. You can customize it to what you want. Apple guy's not going to care because it's got nothing to do with the performance. It's got nothing to do with any of that. He just doesn't like the way it makes him feel working on a PC. And that's brand.
Yes.
That's like saying it's exactly the same as then, well, don't ever buy a luxury car. Why? Buy a car that gets you from A to B. Because if the experience of using it doesn't matter and it's only about function, then you're not Apple's target market.
Exactly that.
But then you can't sell you can't sell a laptop for 60,000 Rand.
That is also true. Yeah. No, I think that that actually summarizes quite nicely along the lines of what would you say makes a good design, is that it speaks to the target market at a level they're familiar with. For case in point, Apple users swear by Apple because they love how it makes them feel.
Exactly.
They're proud to sit in a coffee shop and flip up that MacBook Pro and brandish that Apple on the back of their screens.
It's a tribe. That's
when you know your design has succeeded, because you've built an empire on it.
And the more Android people, or the more PC Android people, for lack of a better word, hate it, the more successful it becomes.
Yes.
Because it's so polarizing. And when you're polarizing, you know that you're doing something right, because you've found a niche. You found your exact market. There's nothing worse than kind of just pleasing everyone, because you just averaged it.
Yes. And if you
That's why, like, coming back to concept artists and illustrators, like, this is again something else that maybe younger guys don't think. Own something. Don't try and be in all things to all people. I mean, I get it in the beginning, and you're trying to get freelance work. You just happen to get the job, and you've got to, have a couple of different styles in your bag. But if you're building your brand as a motion guy, you want to be booked for that thing. You want to build a reputation that when people need that look and feel, there is no one else other than you that can do it. Then you don't have competition. And I think there is something to be said. Look, you can't. It's a difficult thing, the balance between being a generalist because you still have to eat, and a specialist. But if you are able to do amazing work of the same kind of work for long enough and build a name around that, it's much easier to get noticed and to get known than if you're a generalist. Because every time someone sees your work, they get the same feeling from it. And that's how you build a brand. You just, every time a contact point happens, you reinforce the way someone feels. Because it's all that's, people make choices based on how they feel. That's it. Whether it's a computer you buy or the person you marry or whatever, it's all about how you feel.
It's a good example would be if you were to go into the visual effects world and you want to be known for being an explosions artist.
Exactly.
You will go.
That's a really good example, actually.
And yeah, it's funny enough. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to get into VFX a whole lot of years back, and then realizing how vast the VFX world actually is. It's not just making things explode. It's also green screen. You can actually specialize as someone who does rotoscoping.
Totally.
Although I wouldn't do that to myself. I do not have the sanity for that.
But it's so true though, and I mean something like that there's a specialist needed, especially something like that, because there's situations where getting an explosion to look authentic is flipping hard, and you'll go on YouTube and you'll go like, After Effects like flame, and you'll have some like retard with his hand burning, and it just looks ridiculous. To get it to actually look effective with ambient occlusion and reflections hitting other wall in real, it's just that you could spend a lifetime becoming that guy, and you will never be without work if you are that guy. That you'll never be without work.
Yeah, there's a studio here in Cape Town who specializes in VFX effects like water, rain. They worked on Roots for the BBC History Channel.
Okay,
and they do a lot of green screening, taking a shot from start to end. And this, what you said now, reminds me of one of the shots I saw where they had to put a ship in an ocean. Sounds easy, but to create that ocean, you need a specialist to create that ocean with the wave crashes and the splash and the vapor.
Exactly.
It's not just putting some water in a container in Maya or Krakatoa or Houdini and there you go. There's actual physics to consider.
Exactly. And that's the thing, it's that, I come from a background in the music industry, and you can buy a microphone for 10 grand. That'll get you 85-90% of the way there. If you want another 10%, you're going to spend another 200,000 rand. And it's the same thing with Hollywood. I mean, that's why the budgets of those things go through the roof, because if you want that level, you have to have that guy who understands that whatever the nuances are underwater against, this material, when someone falls in, and the oxygen content of the water, whatever it might be, to have someone who understands the physics at that level and can actually create the illusion and make it work, you're in small company.
Yeah, that's when also you put that person on the brief, and that the brief will meet the expectations, because that person comes from a long line of mistakes that taught him lessons to be where he is at that point.
Exactly.
I purposely made that example of having made mistakes that taught them, because it links back to what we said earlier. You're going to learn lessons the hard way, and a lot of the creative growth process, especially for me, has been learning from creative mistakes. Yes, quite a few of them were made intentionally, but in a controlled environment, where I would speak to my art director and I would say, why is this a bad decision? And then I'll show him a bad decision, and then he'll break it down for me. It's like, you don't want to do this or this because you're causing your foreground to blend with your background. You're causing your color palette to become monochrome when you want a duotone. So then those are the kinds of conversations that I feel we also need to have a lot more of in the world today. There's too much of, it looks good, put it live.
Absolutely. I constantly have this debate. I had a huge issue with this recently where, 70%, to release something at 70% is not good enough for me. And there's so much pushback at that, because people will say, well, if you don't release it, then you never get it released. Rather get it released and then just keep releasing updates, or just no, I won't work like that. I can't work like that. I want to release something at 90%. And if that means I take a lot longer, then I take longer. And I'm fine with that. Because that for me is the difference. One of the big differences between Apple and PC is just from it. Look, PC's improved massively. Windows has improved dramatically. I don't want to say PC because obviously Linux is an option as well.
Yeah,
but Windows has improved dramatically, but they are the perfect example of being guilty of releasing shit before it's ready. And they go, well, it's fine because it's not going to work, but this is the shipment date that was decided 2 years ago, and it's tough, and we're just going to have to release an update. That's just not okay.
Yeah.
For me personally, it's not okay. And I understand that you'll have business guys that'll come with, the metrics of staying in business and how, from a profitability perspective, there isn't any other way. I just would rather not be in that business then.
Yeah, the only instance I found where releasing stuff constantly at 70% is okay is when you're A/B split testing for data generation. It's doing that.
Exactly. That's yes, there are times. But I mean, imagine like now's a perfect example. It's about consequences. So let's just release the COVID vaccine at 70%. Like, why not? Just 60%. Well, it's good enough. Let's release it, and then half the world dies. So it's just a question of how much do you care?
Yes.
And companies with that sort of thing, they just don't care enough to release software that just crashes, or they don't think about the user. They just think about the profit.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe it's just carry on.
No, you're right. It also comes down to it becomes very visible once a company starts caring more about their profits than the users. You'll see it with the company user base dropping off, or when you strong arm someone into forcing to adhere to your conditions, and then they jump over to another service.
You see it a lot when companies get bought out. Because they did something so well in the beginning and people love it, they get bought out, they grow too fast, and it just falls apart.
Yeah, I've seen that happen so many times. But oh well, c'est la vie, eh?
Yeah. got to find your own way through. We pick our battles and kind of find your own niche somewhere.
Yeah.
There are people that are fine with it. There are people that don't care. They'll be like, well, that's all, and that's cool. People must live their lives and do what they want to do. Just for me personally, I can't do that.
No, I can't see myself in that position either. It's like I've spent too many years filling the hamster in the wheel role to be okay with staying in that wheel. It's like, is that all I really want to look forward to? Just grab the next part of the wheel and make the wheel turn? No, I want to know why am I making this wheel turn? What am I generating electricity, or am I performing in a circus because I'm the best hamster in the world? Why?
Right.
And for me, that's important. It's like, I need to know why a piece of creative is being put live. Is it for data generation? Is it for replacing an eye on someone's face for a movie production? Is it a music video to sell a new song released by a local artist? Or what are you trying to achieve? And then once those questions are answered, then I'd be happy to start looking at what the options are and then what's possible. And then again, coming back to what you said earlier, with the years of experience, you become jaded, or you develop nuances as well. And you start thinking, okay, this guy wants to reach this audience. He's a jazz artist, or she's a jazz artist. They want to promote a new album because they're going to have a live stream session in 3 weeks. Cool. From there, like you also then said, we can start asking the questions.
Like where are you planning on it being successful? Because maybe you're going for maybe your market's in Vienna, and that might completely change the art direction of the video.
Exactly.
It's all those sorts of things. And then somebody else says, we'll go, oh, I don't like the video. Cool, it's not for you.
Yeah. It's exactly the same as when we were discussing this very episode earlier today, when you asked me, who are we speaking to? Are we speaking to animators, illustrators, designers, concept artists, motion designers? Because knowing who you're going to speak to determines a lot of the narrative.
Well, it's everything. Otherwise, because that's the whole point of what you're doing, is you're conveying a message, you're communicating something.
Yeah.
And if you don't know who you're talking to, then nothing you say can work.
Yeah.
Because you don't even know if they're speaking the same language. And that's where almost all creative fails, is because they don't understand the market well enough.
Yeah.
It's the number one reason why things fail.
Yes, exactly that. And I agree 100% with that. If you don't know who you're speaking to, and if you're not speaking the language of the people you're speaking to, your creative won't connect with them. And
exactly.
That's why I've noticed a lot of companies move to a storytelling driven marketing model, because stories connect with people.
Absolutely. Yeah, yes. But then again, like the thing with that is also that becomes then a trend that everyone wants to jump on. And for yes, but you've got to have a story. No one wants to hear a boring story or a story that's not interesting.
That is true.
You know what I mean? It's like there are two sides of that. Absolutely have a story. And if you don't have a story, find someone that can write you one, because maybe your story just isn't very interesting.
That's exactly that. There's what you said now about also trends reminds me of how you beautifully answered a question on LinkedIn. And I'm going to ask you to answer this again about logos becoming the same nowadays and how designed logos are losing their personality. You reminded me of that, and I thought that your answer on LinkedIn was perfect for how you addressed the question they asked of, do you think that logos are all becoming the same and losing their unique identities because of the market trend?
You see, that was a perfect example of people going the other way around. They're looking at the logo without looking at why.
Yes.
And again, forgetting that this is design. It's not, let's all look a certain way. There's reasons. It's like why are people suddenly all wearing yellow if that's the case? It's not that fashion designers are lazy. There are reasons.
That is the reason for it. There's a market need for it.
Right. And instead of saying, well, it's rubbish, rather try and understand the reason.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
I think that wraps up this quite well. And we've spoken quite a bit now about the design and the thinking behind design, about what makes a design good, what makes sure it's effective. We haven't had any questions. It was really cool chatting to someone like-minded, like you especially, that's willing to actually speak up and not sugarcoat an explanation. Because if we're gonna go around and just beat around the bush, then no one's ever going to say anything, and we're just going to go down a spiral of okay, it looks good, let's give him his 5 points for participation.
I think opinions are important. I just think people must back it up.
Yes.
It doesn't really matter what the opinion is, but have a reason for it, have a rationale, and have and just think about it, don't just accept everything, just really think about it, and then have a position that you can defend.
Yes.
That for me is important. Otherwise, especially for creators, otherwise what are we doing? We're just responding. Otherwise you're just responding. You're not really moving the industry forward. You're not really doing anything. You're just reactionary as opposed to the cause,
Yeah. Definitely.
And then you just noise. You just noise it.
And especially what you just said now is what I found is a key component in client pitches. Have an explanation for the creative that you're proposing. If you can't explain your creative to the client and you can't sell them on the rationale, then you're just going to stand there and add to the white noise of rejected briefs.
Yeah, it's also, this warrants another call, but that kind of moves on to the idea of there's a difference between what people want and what people need.
Yes.
And it's your job to read between the lines and to push for what they need, even though they might tell you what they want.
Definitely.
And there is a big difference. And the further apart those two things are, the more value you're adding.
Definitely. No, I agree with that. I think with that, we can also wrap. Let's go have our evenings and go have our supper. I'm having a dog here that's looking at me and going like, give me attention. I'm like, yes, I will just.
I thought you said you were going to have a dog for supper.
No.